August 15th, 2007. A midsummer night in the German city of Duisburg. Right beside the central railway station, an Italian restaurant called Da Bruno. Inside, 6 men are celebrating a birthday. The youngest of them, Tommaso, had turned 18 that very day. Glasses are raised, they're laughing. An ordinary summer night, an ordinary celebration. It's just past 2 in the morning. They get up from the table, walk outside, and get into their cars parked a few meters away. And out of the darkness, 2 figures appear. That night, more than 70 rounds were fired on that street. 6 men inside 2 cars, torn apart by automatic gunfire. But the killers left nothing to chance. Before leaving, they fired 1 more bullet into each man's head, including the boy celebrating his 18th birthday. All 6 died there on the spot. They were between 16 and 39 years old. To find the man who pulled that trigger, the police of 3 countries would hunt him for a year and a half. His name was Giovanni Strangio, and from the outside, he was the most ordinary man in the world, because by day, he sold pizza in a small German town. This is the story of that two-faced man, a pizzeria owner by day, the executioner of a blood feud by night. But to understand him and the 6 men who died that night, we first need to understand a rule. Because what killed those men was not a trigger, it was a code. And the name of that code had barely ever been heard in Germany until that night: the Ndrangheta. Welcome back to Endless Night Files. When most people hear the word Mafia, they think of Sicily, that world we know from the films, Cosa Nostra. But the truth is, Italy's most powerful, richest, and most dangerous criminal organization isn't in Sicily. It's at the very tip of the Italian map, that boot shape in the region of Calabria. Its name is the Ndrangheta. And what makes them so lethal can be summed up in a single sentence. In this world, real power lies not in being visible, but in being invisible. The Ndrangheta turned invisibility into an art. If you've watched the Albanian files on this channel, you already know them from the other side. This is the organization the Albanians once worked for. So how did this organization become so untouchable? The answer is hidden in its structure. The Sicilian Mafia could be broken over the years because men came forward from the inside, men who repented and informed. But the Ndrangheta was built differently. It is less a gang than a federation of families. Every cell is founded on blood ties, which means betraying the organization means betraying your own family, your own blood. The man you give up is your brother, your uncle, your father. That is why making this organization talk is almost impossible. The secrets stay locked inside the blood. And how did this poor mountain organization become Europe's richest criminal empire? Briefly, like this. By most accounts, it made its first great fortune in the 70s and 80s by kidnapping the children of wealthy families and holding them captive in the mountains for ransom. So much so that on one occasion, they cut off the ear of the grandson of one of the richest men in the world and sent it to speed up the ransom. That blood money was invested into drugs, and in the 90s, while the Sicilian Mafia was at war with the state and collapsing across the headlines, the Ndrangheta went quiet, disappeared from view, and silently took over Europe's cocaine trade. The one who made noise fell. The one who stayed silent inherited the empire. The entire strategy is hidden in that single lesson, and the heart of this world is a small, poor village in Calabria's Aspromonte Mountains, San Luca. Members of the organization call this village Mother, the one who raises you and punishes you. It's a capital, a place of pilgrimage, where honor, loyalty, and revenge are passed down through generations by an unwritten constitution. They called themselves the Honored Society, and entering that society had its own chilling ritual. Keep that detail in a corner of your mind. We'll be going back to that restaurant in Duisburg. Now our real story begins. because the reason 6 men died that night goes back 16 years to a few eggs thrown in this village. The year is 1991, a carnival day in San Luca. A few young men throw eggs outside a club belonging to a rival family, at the windows at a car. Under normal circumstances, a childish prank that would end right there. But those boys belonged to one family, and the place they threw them at belonged to a rival family. And in these lands, an egg is not an egg. It's an insult, and it cannot go unpunished. In the tension that followed, 2 young men were killed, and in that moment, something began that no one could stop. Because here, the death of 2 young men wasn't the end of a fight, it was the beginning of a war. The village split in 2. On one side, the Ndrangheta family, on the other, the Pelle Votari family. 2 clans, and between them, a ledger of blood that grew every year. By 1993, the feud had reached such a point that, by most accounts, 4 people were killed within a single hour. An elderly patriarch stepped in and brokered a fragile peace. But in these lands, peace is not an ending, it's only a pause for breath. The ledger doesn't close, it's set aside, and someone always opens it again. That ledger was reopened in the middle of the 2000s, and this time it would not close. The scene that lit the new fuse tells you on its own what this feud had turned into. A man from the Pelle family, nicknamed Ciccio Pakistan, was shot on the balcony of his home while holding his newborn baby in his arms. The bullet lodged in his spine and left him paralyzed from the waist down. But that wasn't the end of the story. By most accounts, that man swore revenge from his wheelchair, from his paralyzed body. He could no longer pull a trigger himself, but others would pull it in his name. And that revenge came on the 25th of December, 2006, on Christmas Day. Pelle's men raided the home of one of the leaders of the rival Ndrangheta clan. The real target was that man, but the bullets found not him. They found his wife. Maria Strangio was killed in her own home on Christmas Day, and that date was no coincidence. Because in this world, striking an enemy on a holy day has a special meaning, to turn that day forever into a day of mourning in that family's calendar, to transform a celebration into permanent grief. This was the mindset of the Ndrangheta, not simply to kill, but to turn pain into a message. Keep this detail in mind too. In a moment, you'll understand why a birthday was chosen. And right here, the face of our story steps onto the stage. At Maria Strangio's funeral, a young member of the family appeared. He was Maria's relative. He had a gun in his pocket and, by most accounts, was ready to take revenge right there in the cemetery. He was detained, then released. His name was Giovanni Strangio. That day, standing over his cousin's coffin, only one thing filled him: revenge. And that revenge would detonate 8 months later, 2,000 kilometers away in a German city. Because Giovanni Strangio was no ordinary gunman. He lived in Germany. In North Rhine-Westphalia, in a small town, he ran his own pizzeria. By day at the oven, serving pizza to customers, a man nobody would turn to look at. But by most accounts, behind that pizzeria, he was planning his cousin's revenge. This was the most frightening face of the Ndrangheta. Your killer could be the pizza man in your neighborhood. Now let's come to the real question. Why Duisburg? Why did this blood feud explode all the way in Germany? The first reason is a bitter irony. Some of the men who died that night had actually gone to Germany to escape this very blood feud, to get away from the suffocating, lethal air of San Luca. They were working in a restaurant, trying to build a clean life. But the coldest truth of this story is this: there is no escape from the Ndrangheta. An organization built on blood ties will find you anywhere in the world. Your name in the ledger follows you wherever you go. The second reason is far darker. That restaurant was no ordinary place. By most accounts, weapons were being kept there, and German police were already watching it. One of the men killed that night, The real target, Marco Marmo, was, by most accounts, the name held responsible for Maria Strangio's killing, and he had come there to that restaurant on his own 2 feet to collect weapons. In other words, he had walked into the place where he would be hunted. The other 5, those young men at that birthday table, died simply because they were beside him, in the wrong place at the wrong time. And one more detail. That region was very close to the Netherlands' giant ports, the gateways of South American cocaine into Europe. So that killing was both Giovanni Strangio's personal revenge and a show of force, saying, "These lands are ours. We reach everywhere." And so, on the night of Ferragosto, Italy's biggest summer holiday, Strangio and the second gunman beside him made their move. The moment the 6 men leaving the restaurant got into their cars, just past 2 in the morning, the firing began. 70 bullets, and at the end, a shot to the head for each of them. 4 bodies in one car, 2 bodies in a van. One was still breathing. He died on the way to the hospital. The invisible empire had broken its own silence that night, with its own hand. And now we come to the secret found in a pocket. Examining the bodies after the attack, police found something strange in 18-year-old Tommaso's pocket. A half-burned picture of a saint, a santino. At first, they couldn't make sense of it, but then, in the restaurant's basement, they found something else. A small room fitted out with the statue of a holy saint. And when those 2 findings came together, the truth emerged in all its horror. What was being celebrated in that restaurant that night was not just a birthday. By most accounts, that night was Tommaso's initiation into the Ndrangheta, a kind of baptism. This was the centuries-old ritual of joining the organization. The picture of a saint, an oath, and the burning of that picture in a flame. The young man, on his 18th birthday, at that symbolic moment of passing from boyhood into manhood, had joined the ranks of a criminal empire. And here lies the darkest irony of this story. That boy thought he was opening a new door in his life. He was becoming a man, joining a power. Yet the organization he joined gave him not a future, but a few hours of life. The night he stepped into manhood, he also stepped into his own death. A night that began with a santino ended with 70 bullets. And this detail also showed how deeply the organization had taken root. The Ndrangheta wasn't just doing business in Germany, it was reproducing itself there. It had carried its centuries-old rituals, that unwritten constitution of San Luca, 2,000 kilometers away. In the middle of a German city, there was a second Calabria that nobody could see. The next day, the world truly saw this organization for the first time. Until that day, Germany had been unaware this structure even existed. It had quietly taken root for years behind restaurants, ice cream parlors, construction companies. But with Duisburg, the curtain was torn open in an instant. The headlines traveled the world, and for a criminal organization, that is exactly the worst thing, to become visible. It's claimed that for precisely this reason, the names at the very top of the organization came together immediately and imposed peace on the 2 feuding families. But now the question was this, and the whole world was asking it. Where was the man who pulled that trigger? Because Giovanni Strangio had vanished after the massacre. When police raided his apartment in Germany, what he left behind told the whole urgency of the story. By most accounts, he had fled in such haste that he left a large amount of cash in his apartment, exactly where it was. A man only leaves money behind when he's running from death. And he had run like a man running from death. From that day on, Giovanni Strangio became the most wanted man in both Italy and Germany. His face was everywhere, but he himself was nowhere. Months passed, a year passed, there was no trace. Had he fled to the mountains, abroad? Was he dead? Nobody knew. He had vanished like a ghost. Until the arrest of a relative, and the small clues found in that relative's home led police to a new address. That address was in the Netherlands, a quiet suburb near Amsterdam. And there, In an ordinary apartment, police found the ghost they were hunting. Giovanni Strangio was living there like a ghost. His wife and young child were with him. By most accounts, he almost never went outside, and when he did, he was always in disguise, meaning police may have been watching him for some time. Europe's most wanted man, disguised as a family man, holding his breath behind the curtains. And then the moment came. The door was opened by a joint raid of German, Italian, and Dutch police. 3 countries had met at the same threshold for one man. A weapon and ammunition were found in the flat. But here is the final irony of the story. The man who fired 70 bullets in Duisburg did not fire a single shot now. He didn't resist. The hunter had finally been hunted, and he surrendered quietly without doing a thing. The man who had spilled so much blood when his own end came simply raised his hands. What followed took place in courtrooms. By most accounts, Strangio was extradited to Italy, not to Germany, because, as the courts put it, the blood that was spilled was Italian blood. The crime had merely been committed in Germany. And perhaps the most striking detail, Giovanni Strangio watched his own trial from his cell in Rome over a video link. From behind a screen, he watched the deaths of 6 men being retold. In 2011, he was sentenced to life imprisonment as the mastermind of the massacre. Justice, at least on paper, had been served. But this is where the real lesson of the story has to be given. Because catching Giovanni Strangio barely touched the organization itself. While the world watched the bodies in Duisburg and the hunt for that man, the Ndrangheta, after that first shock, went back to its old silence. The wound closed, the curtain came down again, and the organization became even more dangerous with the lesson it took from that day. It's claimed that they still control a large share of the cocaine flowing into Europe. Billions of euros turn behind businesses that look legitimate. And the most frightening thing is this: most people still don't know their name. Where you see them is not a mafia film. It could be a restaurant in your neighborhood, a pizzeria, a construction site, just like Giovanni Strangio's pizzeria. The real horror of this story is not in those 6 bodies. The real horror is that those bodies were only the visible tip of the iceberg, a few eggs thrown in a village on a carnival day. 16 years later, 2,000 kilometers away, turned into 70 bullets on a boy's 18th birthday. That half-burned picture of a saint in the boy's pocket is perhaps the only true summary of this story. The moment a celebration turned into mourning, a baptism into a funeral, the first step into manhood, into the last step of a life. That cycle where blood calls for blood, that cold logic that turns a holy day into grief, and the deep silence that covers it all. It's all still there. It just isn't visible anymore. Because the truly powerful monster does not roar. You never hear it. Until one night, outside a restaurant, when it's far too late. And that night was only a single moment of a darkness that will never end in this world. The endless night never ends. Watch the shadows. Good night. This has been Endless Night Files.